Well, howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Follow the Leader. I'm your host, Lee Larson, and from Oklahoma, I bring to you my friend, Nick Coffey. Nick, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Lee, very much for having me. This is the first time that I've been on a Montanan podcast, so it's quite the honor. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Folks, Nick Coffey is running for Attorney General down in Oklahoma. He was a federal prosecutor for years after studying law at OU. And funny enough, y'all will appreciate this. My boyfriend knew Nick through Rush, fraternity Rush at OU. They didn't go the same fraternity, but when my boyfriend saw that he was running, he was like, I know that guy. He's running for office. And I looked into his campaign and I thought, man, this is a great campaign. Y'all know that I've made some comments about Ryan Walters, Christian nationalism, and then, of course, went to seminary in Tulsa and was like, I've got to hear from Nick. This is a great story. Nick, welcome again. Tell us, you're a fifth generation Oklahoma boy. You're running for office. And of course you did your career and all your studies in Oklahoma. I mean, you are Oklahoma through and through. Why why have you raised your hand to run for office as a Democrat for Attorney General in Oklahoma?
I think a lot of reasons, but the biggest thing is until September, right? I was just a normal guy going to work. I was a federal prosecutor. I was there for over 7 years, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oklahoma City, working drug and money laundering cases. I was doing the job every day, just waking up and going to work. And like a lot of Oklahomans, I'm frustrated with where our state is. It just doesn't seem like there's anybody in office, one, that's holding other elected officials accountable when they mess up. And two, no one, it just strikes me that our state leaders aren't really fighting for ordinary Oklahomans. They claim to be grassroots, they claim to work for the people, but nothing they're doing suggests to me they're actually working to make normal Oklahomans' lives better. And look, you cannot just, and so, given my sort of background and experience, my appreciation for the rule of law, having spent many years as a federal prosecutor, I thought, now is the time. I can't just criticize. I've got to get off the bench and actually run for something. And it's important, right, for a lot of Oklahomans that it's important for them to see that anybody can run for office. You don't have to be extraordinarily wealthy, and you don't have to be a member of the political elite. And when we have people in office that understand the struggle of Oklahomans, we're going to be better off as a state for it, I promise you.
Well, you worked in federal prosecution for several years, I think almost like at least seven.
Mhm.
What kind of cases did you see or did you prosecute? I know that your campaign is really big on corruption. How does that overlap with your experience as a federal prosecutor?
So the kinds of cases I did were they were the long-term, you know, drug and money laundering investigations. Well, I guess let me back up. When I got to the U.S. Attorney's Office, like anybody that arrives to the office, I was the youngest federal prosecutor in the state of Oklahoma at the time. I think I got there when I was 27 years old. And look, I like any job, I worked my way up. And so I started with, some more basic gun case, firearms cases, white collar crimes, check fraud, things like that, postal fraud. And then eventually I worked my way up to doing the biggest drug and money laundering cases in the state, which really entailed working with DEA and FBI and Homeland Security, working at cases that involved national drug trafficking organizations. Oftentimes, these were organizations based in Mexico, but they were operating here in Oklahoma City. And so, really, I did not do political corruption cases at the Department of Justice, and we could probably talk a while about this, Lee, but I feel like perhaps my office and other offices, DOJ offices around the country, aren't prioritizing political corruption like they should be. But I guess where they overlap is, every day I was holding people accountable in federal court. But it just seemed to me like our state leaders have no sense of accountability. Nobody is holding them accountable, oftentimes because they're actually concerned about the political consequences. And so for me, it just seemed like an entirely, it seemed like a double standard.
Yeah, absolutely. And uh, I'm glad you brought up, working drug and money laundering, particularly working with cartels, because you wrote an article not too long ago about ICE not being transparent, but how that's not unprecedented. It's a Folks, it's on. Let me see. It's on the Oklahoman if you are interested in going down that rabbit hole. But can you talk about some of the issues you're seeing with ICE and DHS, either across the country or in Oklahoma, that are giving you pause for concern?
I think the biggest thing is that Oklahomans and Americans just want accountability out of their law enforcement officers. And when I talk about there being, two standards of justice, that means that, law enforcement officials, when they mess up, are held accountable, just like politicians, when they mess up, when they make mistakes, are held accountable. So, I mean, look, there isn't, I'm sure the viewers can probably predict that the first problem we're seeing is that we have two American citizens that were shot in the streets. And I don't think anybody years ago thought that this would have come, or months ago would have thought that this was going to come to fruition. And the frustrating thing, I shouldn't say frustrating, but, I think a lot of people wondered what, if anything, could a state attorney general do if something like that were to happen in my community? And in writing that op-ed, I just laid out basically, look, this idea that somehow federal officials are immune from accountability when you have something like the Renee Good or the Alex Preddy shooting, that's not true. There is a legal process, but it's going to require the leadership of state officials in Minnesota and elsewhere, if something else occurs, that are willing to hold those officials accountable. And long story short, essentially, if ICE wants to claim that they're immune, they're going to have to prove that the officers were acting within the scope of their authority and that the use of force was not excessive. Everybody has seen the videos. I was a prosecutor. I had to prove my case in court every day. I dealt with facts, and given the facts we see on video, that's not going to be an easy case to make if you're ICE.
Well, and you're right. Yeah, so many people watch that in horror, and then of course I was out somewhere publicly the other day, and folks on the other side of it were just completely, Alex Preddy shouldn't even have been there, and just like all of this stuff. And I was like, we are really in a terrible place in this country to have such widely different view on the same video. Well, and that's also the other thing too. When we look at things like ICE being up north or going after some of these cities, whereas they could go to Texas, they could go to Florida, they could go to New Mexico or Arizona, where there are probably a lot, not probably, but there are a significant more folks that may or may not have quote legal status. How would or how is these deportations and this policy affecting Montana work? Sorry, not Montana, Oklahoma workforce. Is it affecting permits and farming? What's going on there?
No, I've heard from folks it's affecting farming, and it's certainly impacting local businesses. I mean, so it can't get any better than this. I mean, this story I'm about to tell you. I've got a family friend that owns a restaurant, and I my understanding talking to my friend is that I'd met his kitchen, I'd met his kitchen staff, and so I'd made comments. Obviously, when Trump got elected, I asked him if he was concerned about any of the staff and their legal status, and he said, "Look, they've showed me paperwork. I don't have any way to verify if it's accurate, but they've showed me paperwork. I think they're here legally. And besides, they're not going to be quote unquote, for those that are listening, I'm putting my hands up in the air with making quote. They're not going to be looking for guys like, I think his name's Sammy. Well, several months go by, and obviously the immigration policy of the Trump administration ramps into full force. And I asked my family friend, if Sammy was to work, and he said no. I mean, I haven't seen him, but he has not come back to work, and I do not know where he is. And the presumption, right, was that he was deported. And I guess the point is that no one thinks that they're coming for the person that is cleaning their home or working in their restaurant or working on their construction project at their home. But I think Americans are waking up to find that that is the place, and that is exactly what's happening. And so it's impacting everything you mentioned, Lee, in terms of how you you know how your home's maintained, how whether local businesses can run, whether projects are getting done on time.
And it's a Oklahoma, for folks who may or may not know that history. Oklahoma is very much driven by oil. It was really a barren state. You could do farming there for sure, but what's underneath the soil is what makes Oklahoma run. And there's a lot of money behind that oil, and it's also very much tied to a lot of religious organizations. Maybe not like tied directly, but associated. There is a concern for folks with the Johnson Amendment. Are you familiar? Have been following the news with the Johnson Amendment? Okay. So I don't know if I want to bring this up now because I might butcher it because I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak.
Okay.
I'm a theologian. But essentially, the Johnson Amendment is what protects houses of worship, 501c3s, and political campaigns. And I think is Trump is looking to remove that Johnson Amendment to make church campaign contributions even darker. Not that there was even really a church campaign. You couldn't, because houses of worship can't be PACs necessarily, but that's what the Johnson Amendment could do, is essentially turn every congregation into a micro PAC. And there's so much money, dark money, that is out there that I know that you're familiar with, in corruption. How have you seen that play out, say, with like Ryan Walters? I know you've written several articles or have talked quite a bit about Ryan Walters and corruption. It's a big mess that has been in Oklahoma. For those who may be unfamiliar, he was the state superintendent of schools. Correct, right? State, yeah.
Yeah.
That was his title. Yeah.
State Superintendent of Education, the official
Education.
title, statewide elected office.
Well, please, can you tell us how he's no longer with the state? He's now moved on to be a private CEO for a teacher union busting group. So he's super fun. He's a super fun guy. Can you talk a little bit about Ryan Walters and then explain the nightmare that has gone for Oklahomans down there?
Yeah, and I guess you led by kind of the link between
The
Ryan
Johnson
Walters
Amendment.
and corruption, right? And I guess
Yeah.
what I've he goes and works for a here's the most basic example of corruption when it comes to Ryan Walters, the biggest picture, if you will. He resigns his position as state superintendent of education, go work for a teacher union busting group, and it was clear based on the decisions he was making, because those decisions were very consistent with the group that he ended up to go work for. He wasn't looking out for students. He wasn't doing his job as state superintendent. He was auditioning for a job for several years while he was state superintendent. I consider that, corruption is not just, Lee, when someone slides a bag of $50,000 in a kava bag or in a fast food bag to somebody. It is betraying the voters with, in making decisions based on ulterior motives such as your donors or what you think your next employment will be. I think all of that is corruption. Now, as far as the story of Ryan Walters, I mean, yes, he resigned as state superintendent to go take another job. His time was highly controversial for violating several state laws that we can dig into. But the saddest thing, Lee, I think, is that there were people on both sides of the political aisle that had it up to here with Ryan Walters. He might have been a Republican, but there were a lot of Republicans that weren't very happy with Ryan Walters for politicizing their schools and frankly making Oklahoma, landing Oklahoma on the national news for some of the outrageous things that he was doing. And despite so many citizens having a problem with what he was doing in office, Oklahomans never got the opportunity to show him the door. Never. And the sadder thing is that not a single state elected official did anything to push back against Ryan Walters. Really, when you look at it, a lot of these folks are running for governor right now. And I think it's pretty clear that they were afraid to take any action speaking out against Walters or any legal action that they had the authority to take because they were concerned that it would hurt them in their race for governor. And so I think it's a sad state on Oklahoma's political leadership that no one had the political courage to show Ryan Walters the door. I mean, they could have brought impeachment proceedings. They didn't have to be a criminal act. They never did.
No, I think that's a great point when you talk about accountability. Accountability is not just because it's ethics, I mean, which it is. Like, it's the ethics, it's the consequence, it is holding people accountable to harms they cause to the community. But for us, it's healing, it's closure, right? Like that, like we needed to show him the door. That's what I'm hearing from you, and we didn't get that. He actually made a huge mess and then got a pay boost, and that's fair. And it's enraging. You're like, how could you do this? And like you said, it seems very steamrolled too. And like you said, a lot of Republicans not being in line with it either. That there is I guess maybe a fracturing too on the Republican side of what MAGA is doing and where this is heading, and then also what I don't know, more moderate Republicans may think. Or so I was looking at Ryan Walters. He did the Trump Bible. Was one of those. Mm-hmm. He was, I don't know, folks, if y'all remember, about a year or two ago, golly, the time running, it had to be within the last year, right? Was a really big part of getting that Trump gilded Bible into Oklahoma schools. And are they still in the schools, or whatever came from that?
I don't think they're still in the schools. And my understanding is he had used X portion, tens of thousands of dollars, basically what he could, because of the authority vested in him as state superintendent, he had an X amount of dollars. It was in the tens of thousands to order these Bibles. I think he did do that. But, a larger order was essentially tied up because he didn't have the authority to do it. And there was litigation over that for a while. I think that's been abandoned, Lee. I think that's been abandoned. And that with Ryan Walters' departure, they're not still trying to do it. But obviously there weren't enough Bibles purchased to put them in every classroom. But my understanding is those have been removed by the interim state superintendent, and Oklahoma is fortunately not moving forward with that.
Yeah. Well, it's just a mess. And there was this, like you said, it's very unfair that someone else came in, steamrolled, gave negative publicity to Oklahoma schools, and then just got a promotion out of it.
Exactly.
And because one of your policies, your priorities on your website, and you said this a few different ways so far, but this lack of not only accountability and justice, but the rules apply for others but not for them. As long as they keep saying, as long as they how do I
there are two standards of justice, and
yeah,
it seems like if you look at the past, one of the reasons I wanted to get into this race is because I want to talk about things that no other person running for office has talked about. I want Oklahomans, when Oklahomans say we don't have a corruption problem, it's hard for me to blame them because it's not as if these stories are in the paper every single day. There might be a day of coverage on it, and then it just fades from memory. But I view it as one of my roles in this race to remind Oklahomans of the blatant corruption that's occurring so that they can make decisions accordingly at the polls. There's just been, Oklahoma over the last 6 years has seen, you know, obviously each case varies, but it is a mix of violations of transparency laws, violations of ethics rules, violations of civil and criminal statutes, and there are either, severely limited consequences, very light consequences for the public official involved, or no consequence at all. And I mean, it's just dangerously because whenever the voter does see that this is occurring, that a public official broke the law and he's just getting a slap on the wrist, I think it breeds apathy. I think it breeds
Right.
apathy in our politics, and people think, well, why do I even need to go to the polls? Nothing's going to change. And when people get into the office and they grift and they make money, no one's going to hold them accountable anyway.
No, and I think that's that apathy or
Mhm.
actively like continuing to support a good example. I just read a book about a woman who spent 2 years in Louisiana in one of the poorest counties, interviewing why do you vote Republican if you live in a very poor county, lots of environmental pollution, and a significant number of people on welfare too in this county. So she was like, "How do you hate the government so much?" And it was because of that. It was like they were like, "Well, yeah, like the corruption is so terrible. The government and all their, the government's not actually doing anything to help me, and uh, people are taking advantage of welfare. Therefore, it's like this whole apathy. It's corrupt. It's bad. So I want none of it, and I also don't want to take accountability to like take action. Study it. Democracy is so vigilant.
Mhm.
It's it's like it's a real thing, and it was a really powerful perspective she brought when, like you said, when things are so corrupt or when things are so bad that people continue to vote for smaller government, even though the government's not actually getting smaller; it's just getting more corrupt.
So what was her take? I mean, was she asked about, well, what do you want us to do about corruption in the state of Louisiana or in local government? Did was she asked
No,
about that?
her point, her book was she's a sociologist out of Berkeley and was trying to figure out why do poor whites vote over and over and over for Republicans, and to them, and it's like anything else. It's a completely different way of looking at the world. A lot of it has to do with honor and Christian moral code and feeling, hey, like the Democrats aren't helpful with that. Okay. Um, but that that these big industries that are moving to their states, like oil or AI data center or whatever that's coming, they're the ones that are giving them jobs, even if there are no environmental policies to protect them from the sicknesses from the jobs. So
Uh, I'm not sure
it's
the AI centers would be giving or providing a lot of jobs there. There might
no,
be some security
correct.
jobs involved. No, I mean this is one of the yeah,
Yeah.
this is one of the there's so much, and this is part of my campaign, but there's so much corporate abuse going on in the state of Oklahoma. And I just got done. A lot of folks aren't aware of this, but on your utility bill, there is a special charge of a few dollars. I mean, depending on your utility, how your natural gas and your electricity bill. There's a special charge each month, and if you add up all those charges among the citizens of Oklahoma, over the next 2 decades, it's going to be about $5 billion. And what are these charges from? Well, they're from a really bad winter storm we had in Oklahoma in 2021. And the utility companies, they say, were forced to go buy natural gas which was used to heat homes and to generate electricity during the storm, at astronomical prices. And the Corporation Commission let them get away with this. And one dissenting commissioner, and there's still litigation over this. I mean, they didn't even have, the utility companies said that it was billions in cost, but they never even did an actual audit. I mean, imagine that. They didn't do an audit and have a licensed CPA come in and verify the costs. And this corporation commissioner, the dissenting corporation commissioner, was obviously, not happy with this, and has called this the biggest fleecing of the ratepayer in the history of the state. This is a individual respected across the state. He served 36 years on the Corporation Commission. And when I talk about corporate abuse, like Exhibit A right there, and most Oklahomans have no idea that these utility companies are taking advantage of them in this way. But frankly, the Corporation Commission in Oklahoma is just completely bought and paid for by the utilities. That Oklahomans, the average Oklahoman didn't find out about it.
And is that OG&E, the utility?
It was for these bond costs, which were about 2 points. So what they said is, these utilities together said it was about 2.8 or 9 billion in costs, and then actually over time, because interest and all these other things are baked in. I mean, there are a lot of people with their hands in the pot here, in the pot. It's going to be about $5 billion over the course of 20-25 years. And so the original costs, though, there were three primary utility providers. There was an electricity provider, or PSO, OG&E, like you mentioned, and then ONG, Oklahoma Natural Gas. But yes, these are the corporations that are fleecing the Oklahoma ratepayer, and the average Oklahoman has no idea. And the attorney general, there was a Supreme Court case back in right after this. And granted, they weren't arguing. The case was not over whether the payments were fair. It was just over whether the mechanism that the legislature said that these bonds could be issued by, because the legislature had to say, okay, you've got all these billions. How are the utility companies, frankly, the people that donate to our campaigns, how are they going to make their money back? And so they came up with a mechanism to do that. And so the Supreme Court case was over the whether the mechanism was legal constitutionally. But the Supreme Court told the state's attorney general back in 2021, it's not the current attorney general, but before that, it ordered him to intervene, to give your opinion on what's going on here. And the AG declined. And I believe one of the concurring justices basically said that the only person that can represent the Oklahoma ratepayer is the attorney general. And the attorney general has abandoned the very people he's supposed to represent. I mean, imagine that you're supposed to be the attorney for the people, and you entirely abandon your statutory duty to enter an appearance before the Supreme Court to explain whether this is a fair process or not. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's, I'm like sitting here like getting more and more mad. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Because you talk about that $5 billion utility bill surcharge fleecing. Oklahoma City, like I said, my boyfriend's from there. Really fun town, a lot of great food. And I know that whole brick town area and a couple other places in OKC were from the MAPS tax program.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to explain, or do you want me to? I can't. It doesn't
Sure.
matter.
Okay. So the MAPS program is it was a city sales tax really passed in the wake of the 1995 bombing in Oklahoma City. You had really, I mean, it really is how far Oklahoma City has come. I mean, like you say, the new restaurants and bars and entertainment venues popping up every year, but all of that is because of a city sales tax that Oklahoma City passed to really, frankly, rejuvenate a city that was on its knees after the bombing. And the city has been remade, and good, people when they evaluate Oklahoma's progress, they always inevitably group in how Oklahoma City and Tulsa are doing. But I always like to remind folks that a lot of the progress those cities have made are because the citizens themselves, such as through the MAPS tax, have invested in themselves. To the extent that those cities have moved forward, I wouldn't really say it's because of state leadership.
And that's exactly what was my point. Was you have state leadership that is all game to do this very corrupt $5 billion utility scheme, and then it's the people that are rebuilding Tulsa and Oklahoma City. While it seems like the leaders just
yes,
knock it down.
and generous philanthropists, frankly.
Yeah. Well, um, so you did a lot with I know we talked about this earlier with your drug cartel and money laundering. You're keeping families safe in Oklahoma. What do you think are some of the biggest harms to Oklahoma families from the state side of it?
Aside from the fact that even if you go talk to business leaders in Oklahoma and members of the chambers of commerce, they tell you that the biggest thing holding Oklahoma back in terms of attracting new businesses are the state of its schools. Aside from that, you know, we have a high level of violent crime in Oklahoma. We have a high level of addiction and substance abuse. We have high rates of recidivism. We have, you know, documented many documented instances of civil rights violations in our jails and our Department of Corrections. And I think, and while all this is happening, we also have, I think, online gaming companies, gaming platforms that are continuing to put our kids at risk while they're online. So there's no shortage, I think, of threats that Oklahoma families face. Now, you know, when I think about what I want to do for Oklahoma's kids, I think number one, make sure that there's not another Ryan Walters. If anyone in the same mold as Ryan Walters emerges again that wants to politicize our schools, it is the job of the Attorney General to step in to make sure that every child is um, entitled to an educational curriculum that has not been politicized and that prepares him for high school and for college. That's the first thing, and then the second thing is, there was actually this is very topical. I saw this morning on the news there's a New Mexico jury that has sided with the New Mexico Attorney General's office in finding Meta, Facebook and Instagram, liable for not having proper safeguards in place for kids online, such that they were exposed to dangerous individuals, predators, frankly, online. And so when I think about that activity, when I think about Roblox is a company that's gotten some news but hadn't been sued yet by Oklahoma, those are exactly the types of cases I want to pursue because these giant corporations, they are profiting at the expense of our kids' safety. And a lot of times you've got a state system. I mean, why the state attorney general here in Oklahoma has not sued yet? I don't, he could be investigating, but I just know I would make it a priority on day one to get that case brought as quickly as possible. Hmm.
The other thing that I think is you talked about corporate abuse, and thank you for talking about kids and education, in which because that's on the list of questions too, is Oklahoma education.
It is the biggest thing holding Oklahoma back. It really is.
And it really is, and it would be, how do I want to say? Because it's not a cure all, but it is one pathway that significantly like, improving that will have massive positive outcomes in other areas too. It's such a direct pipeline to success education, and that's kind of when you were saying the corporate abuse. You have, and we're seeing it here in Montana. I know it's like lots of places where more conservative states, red states, will use a lot of tax incentives to bring industries in. They'll lower tax rates. They'll bring in industries, and then those industries will also hire, and maybe they're not paying well either, and those employees are on subsidies somehow, SNAP, Medicaid, something. And so you've got industries that are like triple dipping in the tax code, and in terms of they're paying such little taxes, and then their employees are also like on tax subsidies, and it becomes this corporate welfare. And ultimately it leads to, I mean, like I've seen, it can very quickly, this corporate corruption coming into states can make those states into third world countries very quickly, just by strong arming environmental regulations, not paying employees adequately, etc. And it's alarming, because that's what I want for Oklahomans or for any Americans. I want you to go to work, be paid a fair wage, and to breathe the air when you walk home. Right? That's
Right.
like,
Simple things in
eh,
life that we all want and we should all be entitled to. And we live in the
that
richest country in the world.
in the world, and yet we are polluting polluting our states and backyards. Like it doesn't matter. Uh, and again, not even necessarily the pollution, which is a whole thing, but really that corporate double or triple dipping, that corruption, the tax incentives. And I understand wanting to bring businesses in, but we're not. The businesses we're bringing in aren't doing the kind of productivity that really they could be, especially with taxes. And I think that's really concerning for a lot of folks. And I don't know if you've heard that from other constituents on the road talking about quote corporate welfare or like wages, but
I
it's
think the
but
big
it's really frustrating.
I think the biggest two
Go ahead.
things that you hear regularly are concerns over, well, as far as corporate abuse, you hear about. I mean, every now and then people do ask about the the storm bonds that we talked about. They talk about data centers, and they talk about what's going on with the insurance industry in Oklahoma. We have the highest homeowner insurance premiums in the country, and the insurance commissioner says that it's because of the weather, but the reality is that you know Texas, Kansas also have hail. They also have tornadoes. They have flooding. But it's Oklahoma, despite having some of the more affordable homes in the country, have the highest homeowner insurance premium. And it's like double or something like that. I'm not saying by it's like, $20. It's
Right.
darn near double, I think.
Yeah. And that and they're citing like tornadoes and yeah, and other
They're
places have
citing natural,
tornadoes
yeah,
and hail too.
they're citing weather, but I mean the problem is no attorney general has ever made the insurance commissioner actually get on the record in court and show his numbers, show basically the underlying analysis of the market for why these costs are fair and reasonable and competitive, because the market has to be competitive in Oklahoma. That's in the statute. Again, because I think every attorney general we've had as of late, I think, is pretty afraid of going up against the insurance industry.
Well, even like I've been thinking about the corruption, and I'm going to be careful when I say this, but I
Okay.
think one of my friends is deeply involved within the indigenous community in Oklahoma, and he
Mhm.
was upset because he feels that the support that Mark Wayne Mullins is receiving from the Cherokee Nation is tied to corporate promises that Mark Wayne will somehow kick back to the Cherokee Nation, about building like steel manufacturing on reservation lands. And again, now we're talking about foreign tribal manufacturing corporations, and like that's a whole thing of
Mhm.
corporations going across the border too, like Texas Mexico, Texas Arizona border.
Of course.
And then I was really like, I didn't even think about that side of it, of different allegiances too, that I don't know. I'm trying to think of how I want to word this question, but it was a really profound, like, yeah, Mark Wayne and Mullen also as a corrupt leader in the DHS, which I already had bad vibes with him. I know he did a lot of what insider trading and stuff like that too.
Yeah,
Uh,
I saw a post recently that we're documenting his five most suspicious stock trades. I mean, why this is legal for anyone in the executive branch or Congress to trade stocks, it's crazy. And it's a pretty bipartisan issue. Most Americans agree. But the problem is who's making the laws? The people that are benefiting from this.
right, right. Or like even like Kalshi or whatever, all these like Poly Market and these political betting sites. I'm like, how is that even? How can you bet on this and then turn around and go write the legislation? So,
Yeah.
like, really quite scary. Can you talk about one of your cases in which you felt profoundly moved, or I know you mentioned some already, but corporate corruption in Oklahoma, especially while you were working either as a federal prosecutor or even what you came across in law school?
Well, sorry, a case involving corporate corruption because I actually, I
Yeah.
didn't do. I mean, typically, typically corporate corruption is not a federal
No, no, no.
charge, if you will.
No. I just mean like from your research, from your experience when other issues. I know you had just talked about the utilities. I brought up Mark Wayne Mullen and how that could tie into, you know, industries and land and tax incentives.
Hmm.
Um, have you seen this in the private prison area in Oklahoma, and what does that look like?
So, Oklahoma had private prisons, but because I think they were unhappy with the product that they were getting, the state actually bought back the last private prison pretty recently. And
Fascinating.
now they're all under
Wow.
state control. But I mean, look, the State Department of Corrections is not, they're certainly not immune from any criticism. So let me give you a couple examples. There was a director of the Department of Corrections, and for I'm not sure what they call it in other states, but Department of Corrections in Oklahoma is just the state prison system. And the head of the state prison system went and secured a $1 million AI contract for the state prison system. And for reasons I can explain in a second, that contract was needed for a variety of reasons. It was to prevent contraband from getting into the prison and make sure that the prisons were actually safer. The criticism I have is not there. The criticism I have is that after the head of the state prison system the director went and secured this contract with the AI company for the state. Not, I think maybe 6 months later, give or take a couple months, he goes and works for the same AI company that he just gave a contract to. And I mean, this is against the revolving door statute in Oklahoma. There is a statute on the books for good reasons that says you can't do a contract with a company while you're in the state, while you're employed by the state, and then go work for this company. Because again, the idea is that you're not securing that contract for the benefit of the state, you're securing it so that you can go get a job later on. And not a single person I think, I want to be careful how I word this. This is a member of the governor's cabinet. There is not a single word from anyone in the governor's cabinet about how this violates the revolving door statute. There was no investigation opened by the attorney general's office. I mean, there are several individuals running for governor, some of whom did serve in the governor's, or I guess one of whom served in the governor's cabinet. There's an attorney general candidate that served in the governor's, or serving in the governor's candidate. Not a single person is mentioning this. And it's just ludicrous. It's just insane to me that we have blatant corruption like that going on, and it's not the focus of anyone on the campaign trail. The second point I'll make when it comes to Department of Corrections is that we have one of the worst drug trafficking problems in our state prisons in the nation. I saw this when I was a federal prosecutor, and you're like, oh, they're in prison. How in the world are they trafficking drugs? You hear it down at the legislature, they rail against Mexico for flooding our streets with cocaine and fentanyl and methamphetamine. And there's truth to that in the sense that all these drugs are coming from, most of them are coming from Mexico, particularly in this part of the country because obviously of Oklahoma's proximity to Texas and New Mexico border states. But what the legislature and all these people that want to make the news banging the table and talking about Mexico aren't telling you is that in Oklahoma, the people that are buying those drugs, the biggest customers of these cartel groups are white prison gangs. These are groups I prosecuted in the U.S. Attorney's Office. They are the United Aryan Brotherhood and they are the Irish Mob. And using contraband cell phones, they direct this massive drug trafficking from prison, directing their couriers on the outside to pick up drugs from the cartels couriers, and then coordinating for how that money to be distributed to their family, right? So it's profitable. Look, you're in prison, you still might want to take care of your parents, and you use drug trafficking to do that. And so when I think about the addiction facing this state, a lot of it could be cleaned up if we could get prison drug trafficking under control, since all of the drug trafficking runs more or less through the state prison system. But the legislature, because they don't want to upset the Department of Corrections, they don't want to make the governor's, cabinet pick look bad, just refrain from talking about this. But meanwhile, if you search, if you search DOJ, Oklahoma City, Irish mob, or UAB, prison gangs, you're going to see many, many press releases and even some articles um, about how this is a huge problem in Oklahoma.
That is wild. Because that, like you said, that's not the messaging.
No, you should. I mean, to see the jury's face at a trial several years ago, where we showed them the inside, the prison cell. I think they were down in McAllister, Oklahoma, McAllister Lawton, Oklahoma, one of the larger prison facilities in the state, and we showed the cell of these members of the Irish mob, and the jurors' faces whenever I pulled up that exhibit, showing what the inside of their cell looked like. I mean, there's just no order. The walls are graffiti. There's trash and food everywhere. I mean, there is no order at all within these state prisons. It's essentially summer camp for these mobsters.
Right. And for whether it's the mobsters not facing real accountability in the prison system, or even the attendants, the prison guards working and facilitating that,
Who
and
are
then
also
not
sometimes part of the problem. Yeah.
right, and it just becomes this corrupt, depraved. There's no integrity. There's no
There's no
dignity. There's
integrity,
no
and the real sad part is that we're doing nothing to rehabilitate people for when they get out of prison. We are not playing the game very well. We're not it's almost a deal. It's a deal we have with the citizenry of Oklahoma. Yes, you did the crime, you're going to do the time, but we're going to do what we can to get you ready to be contributing members of society so that you never come back. And Oklahoma's just failing. I think we're failing across the board when it comes to that task.
And it's a damn shame, because Oklahomans are some really good people. Like, I really enjoy spent my time in Oklahoma, and people are some of the kindest in the world. And like you said, the corrupt. And then you don't feel like you can do anything. There's a powerlessness to it. Then there's like shame on the people. It's like it all snowballs. Like, leadership really does start at the top. And I'm so thankful that you're raising your hand to run. I think it's very courageous. I think it's bold. I think it's necessary. Nick, I really, really am thankful to talk to you. And I know that we're getting close to the end. Can you share with the listeners where they can go to follow or donate or learn more about you?
Sure. Coffeyforok.com. That's COFFEYFOROK.com. That's our website. Please check it out. And then we're, of course, on every social media platform. And so one of the ways we're obviously trying to get our message out, we're talking about the corruption going on in Oklahoma, corporate abuse, and just frankly the civil rights violations that we're seeing across the country are occurring is through social media. Please check us out.
Well, Nick, thank you so much again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know that you've got a lot going on, running a campaign, saving Oklahoma. It's a lot. So thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Alrighty, folks, that was another episode of Follow the Leader. I'm your host, Lee Larson. Thank you for hanging out with me this afternoon. What did you think? Make sure you let me know in the comments. And you know the drill: like, follow, subscribe. Yeah. But do that. Help me. Help Nick Coffey. Let's get his name out there. And folks, I will see y'all next time on Follow the Leader. See ya. And stop.